when it's a little later here. Okay. So, hey there, Angie. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited to have you here today to share a little bit more about your story, and we're going to have just a fantastic conversation. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to talk.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm happy to be here, happy to be connected with you. It's been a little bit of time that since we've connected. Originally, I think you saw my background or our shared purpose around leading a sober, healthy life. And here we are. So it's wonderful how really one of the joys of recovery is just the worlds that I have been introduced to and opened up to. And that's really a direct result of being willing and encouraged to share my story to freedom from alcohol use disorder started on the positive side of things in 2020. On February 2nd of 2020, I was again suffering from having been on a probably week-long binge drinking episode. I was struggling for over 10 years with alcohol use disorder. And like many adults my age, I'll be 53 this week, I was never taught healthy coping skills. Like we just weren't. No one was really talking about healthy coping skills during that time of the world or of society or of family life. And I was struggling with how to cope in a healthy way with really a triad of different life challenges that started in 2010. So fast forward 10 years later, on February 2nd of 2020, I was having serious complications from withdrawal of excessive alcohol use and was taken to the hospital. This would have been for the fifth time. So it was my fifth hospitalization for serious health and life complications from excessive alcohol use. And I was put into intensive care. I was admitted in critical condition. And what happened was not only, of course, the damage over 10 years of drinking to multiple systems within my body. For me specifically, it was a dangerously low level of sodium in my blood. So that's what prompted the intensive care. And I was in the hospital about 5 days and don't remember a lot from that time. I remember being very foggy. I remember very fuzzy hallucinations that I have discussed with my therapist and my psychiatrist, who then I was connected with during that time frame as well. And when getting released from the hospital, I had a doctor who was very straightforward with my very limited options. And it was to keep drinking and I would die. I was literally killing myself with alcohol. Or I could stop drinking and have a choice at living a better life. And I chose wisely with option number 2. And again, it's February 2020. So the world hadn't yet shut down. I had lost my job from problematic performance and, inconsistent attendance, of course, all due to my unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and entered an outpatient treatment program. So it's called an intensive outpatient program, so an IOP. And the intensive outpatient was to really set the stage for me, set a firm foundation for a life of sobriety. At that point, I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what that looked like, but I knew that the 12-step approach was not the right fit for me. Of course, 2020, that's here in Iowa, that was really the only approach that anybody knew. And so I would be set up with potential sponsors and programs and go to 12-step meetings never feeling that I belonged there. I felt that I didn't fit in. And it wasn't the spiritual component of it. I have my higher power. I talk to my higher power. So it wasn't that spirituality that struggled, where I struggled. It was that I could not do two things. I could not label myself as an alcoholic, and I still do not use that phrase. And I could not say that I was powerless. I felt and still do that I had the power I needed to overcome this struggle, my challenges. I believed that alcohol buried it to the point that I was unable to tap into my power, but I believe it was always there. So because I didn't fit or felt like I didn't fit, I didn't know what else was out there. I didn't know about programs like Smart Recovery or This Naked Mind or some of these other programs that thankfully have developed as complements to 12 steps. And I have friends and family members and many people, millions of people who have been helped by a 12-step approach. So it's not that I am not in favor of it. I was just not in favor of it for me. It was just not a fit for me. So 40 days later, the world shuts down and COVID puts a halt to in-person programming. And at the time, that's what my programming was like. So that was all put on pause. So I was about 40 days sober, and everything that I had kind of built my newfound sobriety on was taken away. At least I thought, maybe temporarily, but who knows. And so I kind of was at a turning point and thought, well, either I find my own way forward or I am going to resort to what the doctor warned me against. I knew that. I didn't want to do that. So having a background in HR and leadership development, I actually leaned into the lessons that I learned during graduate school about leadership. It started with knowing and aligning with our core values. So I found an activity that we had done in graduate school, found my long forgotten box of grad school supplies, took that activity out, and sitting alone in my little apartment, isolated in Eastern Iowa, I led myself through the same activity. So it was kind of a 15-year cycle of having learned leadership, having lost leadership, and having now regained leadership by aligning with my core values. And now I am approaching 4 years of freedom from alcohol. I'll be celebrating that on February 2nd, which ironically is Groundhog Day, maybe not so ironically. But thankfully on Groundhog Day of 2020, I chose to lean into the sunshine and not fall backwards into the shadows. And that's what's kept me moving forward.
Wow, thank you so much, Angie, for sharing all of that. I love this incredible story because it is yours and it's unique and personal and powerful in every single way because you found a way to stay sober, and that's all that truly matters. But it's also somewhat unique, right? It's a little bit different than the kind of quote unquote traditional alcoholic journey, my alcoholic journey for sure.
Right,
And so
right.
I love that. And that's what I love about doing this show so much, because I get to talk to so many different women who are doing incredible things with their lives, especially now because they are sober. And just to hear the different ways we can do it. I got sober kind of a long time ago, and really the only options were rehab and AA. And that's what I did. And that's okay, because it really did work for me. And of course I didn't know any better. I didn't view myself as having any other options at that time. I'm sure there were other options, meaning like I could have just tried it on my own. I could have just not gotten sober.
Yeah,
But this is what worked for me. And I did fall in love with the program and worked it pretty religiously for a long time and found it to be very useful. And that's wonderful. I also knew that as I grew, and beyond that first year of sobriety and first couple of years, I knew I needed a little more. So I needed a little more growth, a little bit more recovery, but in a different kind of way. So I started layering in some of the things you're
exactly.
probably referring to. It looked a little more like complementary kinds of medicine for me. It looked a lot like coaching and therapy and yoga, things like that. So I started to do those things, which is what helped me kind of enhance and elevate. And I've continued to do that along the journey, right? Because we never truly arrive. We're always, adding new things, looking for new ways to grow. Or we, I believe that we kind of should be doing that if we want to continue to grow in life. But I love that you talk about your personal core values, because that is something that I speak quite a bit on as well. And it's actually the whole third module of my signature course that I use to help women thrive in long-term recovery. And we use an activity, maybe it's similar to what you did, but I really, really want to hear more about what that looked like for you, if you're willing, whatever you're willing to share with us, what that actually looked like you practically. And if you could just talk us through what you discovered in that.
When I learned it in graduate school and then taught it as a faculty member in graduate school, we did different versions of it. There were, journaling, there was, descriptions, there was sharing. What I found most powerful, because it taps into my learning style, is something that's kinesthetic, where you're actually doing something. Yes, you're writing, perhaps you're sharing. Mine is a deck of cards. So I use a deck of cards that each card has a values word on it. I don't know how well you can see it. Resilience. And there's about 55 different values words. And the activity is literally sorting. So you go through the 55 words, sort it into 3 piles. Very important, somewhat important, less important. And typically, and this was the case for me, we have many more cards in the very important values stack. The goal is clarity, right? If we are living and leading our lives with 30 different, very important values, we're constantly spinning our wheels, right? I believe values are an internal compass that helps set the direction for actions we take to move us in a specific arena or move us forward toward a vision or a goal that we have for ourselves. So when we start with, 25 very important values, it becomes critical to then narrow that down. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes people struggle a little bit with it. What we find in conversation is that many of us, especially women, will adapt or adopt other people's values, right? So you look through this, and I'll just pick one here. Let's say happiness, right? Happiness looks different for different people. So whereas previously I might have connected my happiness with the happiness of my spouse or the happiness of my job, or so it wasn't necessarily my happiness, it was everyone else's. And as we go through really this narrowing down process, the question is this a value of yours, or is it a value you feel should be yours because it's imposed on you by other people? So by narrowing down to 5 or fewer values, we gain that clarity of, this is me. This is not who they think I should be. This is not who society tells me I should be. This is me. And that gives us the power to identify what actions we need to take to keep moving toward those values.
I love that. So we have that similar activity, except it's just lists of words. I don't have the fancy cards. And so, yeah, but when you see those words, there's like hundreds of them on those lists, and we can relate to a lot of them. I mean, there might be ones that we can quickly check off that are like not us. You're like, no, that's not me. But there's so many that we do relate to. And it's actually a very, I find, and I've had some of my clients say to me that it's actually a much more challenging activity than they were expecting.
Yes.
It was hard to get it down to 5. And I have mine like literally taped on my computer right here. So I mean,
Oh
I
yeah,
love that because I think we need to be, and I encourage my clients to have like a card or to write them out so that it's a visual experience for you on a regular basis,
right,
like put them places, because then what happens is we, well, I want to back up because I so much agree with what you said. And even more so, I think what happens, I think, for so many of us is we adopt, like you mentioned, the values that we kind of grew up with, and maybe from our parents or our caregivers during that time. And we sort of take them on, and that's how we live our life. But then during adolescence is that developmental stage when we're naturally trying to break away from our parents and become ourselves, separate from our parents. We go through a little bit of a process where we are looking at whether or not those values are ours or not.
right,
Sometimes the maturity, depending on your maturity level, and also I believe if you've already started using substances, you're pouring on substances on your brain that is gonna, I think, really affect your ability to discern what is yours and what is not. And
mhm,
so I think that's how we get off track, a lot of us who are addicts, or because we never went through that developmental stage in adolescence to figure out what those were.
right,
And then we get sober, and like all of a sudden you're like, or maybe you did it another time, maybe you were in college and then you're like, well, actually I hate science, I don't want to, my dad was a doctor, his dad was a doctor, I don't want to be a doctor, but you just didn't know that until you finally woke up to it. And I think that waking up happens a lot for us after we get through that initial phase of early recovery, when we can have clarity of mind to begin to realize what is ours and what's not. Because even for years in early sobriety, many of us can't discern that. Like we're still trying to figure that out. I don't know if that was I mean, you did this pretty early on when you got sober, but so I don't know if that what your experience was with that, but did you have struggles with that, like discerning what was yours and what wasn't?
once I sat down with the cards and actually worked my way through it, there was something in that hands and that kinesthetic process that really helped me. And I use a lot of visualization. I'm also a mindfulness teacher. I wasn't at that time, but I was kind of getting better at working my own mindfulness practices into it. And I really held each card and visualized, could I see myself engaging in behaviors that aligned with that value?
Mhm.
If the question was, I'm not sure, then that it wasn't a core value for me. And that doesn't mean it was a bad value. That doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means I couldn't see myself engaging in that behavior on a regular basis, which was a way of discerning, is this my value or is this a value that I've interpreted as being mine based on any external pressures? And it could be families, it could be society, it could be workplaces where we
Mhm.
work in an environment that doesn't feel right, but we don't know quite why it doesn't feel right. In those
Mhm.
cases, it's common to have a disconnect between our personal values and the organization's values, or the values that we see our leader demonstrate or our boss manipulate around in some toxic examples. And those can be very intuitive, and it might take us longer to realize that gut check, that feeling of, ooh, something is off, not to discredit that, not to ignore the signs or the clues that our body is trying to tell us, and
Mhm.
to do a little bit more investigating.
I love that the way you distinguish that using activities versus just thoughts or feelings about it. I've never really thought about it that way, and I'm so thankful that you brought that up, because that is a real practical way to even visualize yourself in that experience. I mean, maybe you're in the world doing it, like you work in a job like you mentioned, and you're doing some things so you can actually feel it because you're living it. But if you're trying to make a change in your life, or you're trying to discern what these things are, really imagining yourself, or like maybe finding a friend who works in that kind of an environment, or visiting places like that to just see how it feels for you, I think would be really helpful. I wish I wish I had done more of that. I'm thinking of my college age kids right now
Oh, sure.
who do
Yeah.
that, right? Like
Well,
I had one client, or somebody I know had a daughter who said she always wanted to go to law school. And I have one who's saying that now too. And she said her daughter went and worked for a lawyer and realized all it was a bunch of paperwork all the time and was like, forget this. I don't want to go to law school. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea of like connecting it with an activity. And also, um, when you're with people, I've seen this in my own personal life with my partner who has changed jobs a few times in the last several years, and being with different leadership and what that's been like for him to experience ones that do not align
Oh, yeah.
with his core values, which was very new for him and also very difficult,
Mm,
very difficult because he knew right away, like he was right away knew this is not for me. But
yeah.
then the process of like working through that was very challenging personally because you're like, why did I make this decision to go to this job? Or is there something about me that's saying there's something wrong with this person's way? Or it's very, very interesting process.
Yeah. Yeah. I have two sons, both adult age, which feels weird to say.
Yes.
My oldest son is 24. My youngest son is 21 and is still a college student at the University of Iowa. And we as a family do these values cards on an annual basis. So I will do them about this time of year, and each of my sons will do it as well. And we'll do it separately, but then we'll look at it together as a family. And yeah, there are sometimes we have a word or two that is a shared value, but more often than not, their values are different from mine, and that is okay. My oldest son just got engaged, and it's something that I've encouraged for him and his fiance to explore. And it's not that you're looking for a partner or a friend or a workplace that has exactly the same values as you. It's, can I exist? Can I support
Right.
these values even though they're different from mine? So that's an area that, even from a family perspective, where it's been useful. Another thing, when I'm facilitating workshops and small group conversations, I will have people grab their phones and I will say, I want you to flip through your photos of the past week or the past 30 days. What values do you see in the photos that you take?
Mm.
And it will be, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I'm valuing a certain thing, until they start seeing a pattern in the photos.
Mm.
If they're taking, what we take pictures of is something we want to capture, right? If it's something we want to capture, it speaks to us. So, what is it in that image, even if we weren't able to articulate it at the time, that we're like, oh, wow, what was it about that that made me want to take a picture? Or
Mm.
maybe there's a lot of pictures of our family, or there's a lot of pictures of our work family. And sometimes just using some of those real life pieces of evidence can
Mhm.
help us with this discernment of my values versus the values of those around me.
That's amazing, the photos. I love that. Mine would probably be my dogs because there's a lot of pictures of my dogs and my kids for sure.
Sure.
One of the activities that I always recommend, and maybe you do this too, is to do a time and or a financial inventory
Yep.
to assess. So if you look at your calendar and you just take a quick sneak peek at your calendar. So say, for example, you are somebody that says you value family or
Exactly.
close connections, and then you look at your family and in every week you don't see any family time or
Right.
a place where you've met your friends for connection time.
Right.
That should be a significant part of your calendar.
Absolutely.
And if it's not, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's not your one of your values, but it does mean that there might be an unalignment of things. Like maybe you don't have proper boundaries at work in order to create the family time that you say is your value. And it is possible that a thing that you are telling yourself is a value is actually not.
Right.
And that's something I think comes from that past stuff. Like if you're saying, I really value, um, travel, I value travel. And because maybe that came from somewhere else, but yet you like never plan any travel or you don't even talk about it or you just don't have it on your calendar. I would really want you to take a look at that. Like, well, who told you that this should be your value? Like, why did you think this was your value? And because you're not having that as part of your life. And that's a lot of times I think people need permission to kind of move past some of those in a way that's almost like sort of therapeutic, right? We need to help them process through that to get to, okay, it's okay for me not to have the same values as where I came from.
Yeah. I also ask people if they are, I'm not sure if this is a value or maybe this is. I ask them if it's a current value or an aspirational value, because it's okay to have aspirational values where it's something I'm working toward. Then the follow-up question is, what are you willing to implement as
Mhm,
action
mhm,
steps
mhm,
as
mhm.
you're working toward that value? So maybe in your instance, I've done, coaching with leaders, and your point about looking at their calendar, that becomes a wake-up call. And they have espoused that family is a value, but their experience dictates differently.
Mhm.
So it could be an aspirational value. And then I said, okay, great. That's wonderful. You aspire to really practice in alignment with this value. What steps are you going to take toward that? And that's really where the magic either does or doesn't happen, where once we realize it's going to take some type of change, behavioral change, time management change, financial change, something has to change for things to change. So we can't say all of a sudden I want to wake up tomorrow and demonstrate, my alignment with the word family as one of my values. It doesn't work that way. You have to actually do something to demonstrate your commitment to that value. And that becomes really the critical next steps for someone who does want to develop an action plan towards some type of change.
I love that. Are you, can you think of a time where that's been a challenge for you, where you've had to like to make a change in that, meaning like you either thought something was your value and then you kind of discovered that it wasn't, or you discovered that your actions weren't matching what what you were saying was your value?
Not as much within the last almost 4 years since being sober. There are times when I will use my values as decision making tools.
Hmm, hmm.
And perhaps I'm looking at two different options. If it's clearly one is much more in alignment with one or more values, then that's an indicator of the direction. Prior to getting sober, it was really, now in hindsight, I can see how a the story I was telling myself was not aligned with the story of who I really was.
Mm.
I didn't know who I was. I was, a wife and a mom and a professional and a graduate student and an active community member. And I was all these things, but they were my roles. They
Right.
were my subsets of my identity. They didn't represent the totality of who I am. And it was getting crystal clear on the who am I, what matters most to me, that became the turning point. Not only, almost 20 years ago now, when I first discovered my values, but certainly within the last 4 years, as I've done much more deliberate and mindful work around my values.
And so one of the things that we know, or that I have experienced myself personally, and then I see a lot in the women that I know and work with, is after that first year of recovery or sobriety. First of all, that's as sober as we're ever going to get, right? After 30 days, really, the body is clean. We're never going to be any more sober than that. And then we have to start implementing all of the work that's going to make the change that is necessary for us to live well as alcohol-free people. So, but after that first year or so, I really noticed is that people begin to get a tremendous amount of more clarity. There's like a wake
Oh,
up that
yeah.
happens after that. I don't know why it is about a year, but it is 9 months to a year-ish for sure. There's this clarity that comes, a waking up, a really a knowing, that starts to happen. And then we're different, and we start to venture into what I call the sort of longer term sobriety phase, right? And where this work that we're sort of talking about can really begin to happen. Did you notice that for you in your experience as well?
Yes, I did. And I think for me, curiosity and clarity are two of my top five values. So I think moving into year two is where the curiosity kicked in. And I started becoming more curious around what was it that led me to use alcohol as a coping skill or as a coping mechanism.
Mhm.
What was it about how I'm wired? What is it about, my natural strengths? What is it? So that's really where the curiosity kicked in. And I started studying mindfulness more officially or more formally. I did a lot of work with Enneagram and studying some of my natural behavior styles, personality styles. There's a lot of different words you can use to describe it, not so much to try to study other people, but primarily to better understand myself.
Mhm.
And that curiosity has just really grown exponentially, I think, every year. I also am a daily yoga practitioner. That's also part of my mindfulness work. I started becoming more curious about the mind body spirit connection. And, just physically through yoga, how do I connect to different spots in my body where something feels off? What does that mean when my neck is tight or I wake up with something in my neck? Sometimes it's yeah, I slept wrong, but
Mhm.
sometimes it's because there's tension there and I need to work on whatever is producing that tension. So that's been an ongoing growth, and again, area of curiosity for me. And there's other programs that I do a lot of studying. I'm very big on lifelong learning. That comes from leadership, that comes from my academic experiences, and it's also an opportunity for me to discern where do I want to focus my learning, because as a lifelong learner there are lessons and programs and classes, and I could spend millions of dollars and millions of hours getting certified in a million different things. That is not always the best use of my time. So using curiosity and then combining that with clarity, it's what can get me more clear about myself. That becomes a decision maker, in just determining what to pursue for my own additional knowledge.
I love that. And I agree with you about being a lifelong learner. I feel the same way. And I've been able to pursue certain things. That's what's been wonderful about, I think, starting a business, right? Or having multi-level areas of business that I work in. I know you do some of that as well, because it allows us to do that, to branch out and like, oh, now I'm learning about how to build a course, or oh, now I'm learning about how to help women in long-term sobriety, or how I mean, I'm a therapist by trade, but therapy isn't the same thing as coaching. And so what does it look like to coach somebody through life skills and change versus in a clinical manner?
Oh,
But
sure.
you're right, we have to be very, I think, very intentional and discerning about how we spend our money and our time, because there is only so much time and money to go around, right? I mean, we do have a lots of freedom to choose, but we don't have infinite time and money, most of us.
Right. Right.
So yeah, we have to decide what is the most important thing. And that can be very, I don't know, for me it's very challenging because I'll get hooked on something. I'll find someone, I'll be like, oh, I love her program, or wow,
Yeah.
she's doing like amazing stuff. And they'll be like, hold the phone. I already committed to this other thing. Like
Sure.
I have to focus on that. Let me put that off till maybe next year or next month or whatever. And sometimes it's hard because we want to do all the things.
Right, exactly. And I remind myself that no isn't necessarily forever. No is a not right now. And
Exactly.
a not right now means it's not that I'm choosing one over the other. I'm just choosing one now
Mhm.
and can consider something else later on down the road if it's still meant to be.
So commitment is one of my core values, as well as persistence, and personal responsibility, which I think they all go into some of these things that we're talking about. Because one of the things I was struggling with, as an earlier business owner, and frankly, all the way into like last year and still can get sucked in, is like kind of shiny object syndrome,
Oh,
where
sure.
I'll get sort of like swept up by a new woman that I follow, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got this course on this thing, and oh, there's a free webinar, and but then we can get entangled with so many good things coming at us at once, that it can be very confusing. It can be counterintuitive. It can be just very unproductive, right? Because now we're spreading ourselves so thin. We're even though it was free, we're investing time now in this other thing. And that person, although maybe an amazing coach or something, but might be selling something a little bit different than what you've been trying to do. And so now you're being kind of pulled to try this new thing. Or maybe I'll try webinars now, or I'll try a group therapy or coaching, and sometimes it's hard to stay the course, on a thing. Like maybe you're on a health journey, and how confusing it can be with health, right? I mean, I'm a big simplify kind of girl. I love to help women really simplify all areas of their life, but really, especially when it comes to health, you can spend hours and thousands of dollars on different things that may never really be a good fit for you. Or maybe one of them was, but you didn't give it enough time because you got swept
Right.
into the next thing, right?
Yep.
So kind of learning how to be committed to the thing you said you were going to do, and then be persistent in like doing the thing. I'm going to stick
Yes.
with it. I'm staying with it. And then, for me, it's like holding myself responsible to that. Like I've had to check myself at times when I've been like, oh, there's a free class, and I'm like, no, you don't need to take that free class
Yes.
right now because you said you were going to do this thing and you're on this thing, and
Yeah.
let's stick with it.
Yeah. I've gotten much better, like you just shared, at catching myself
Yeah.
before I get too far down the rabbit hole.
Mhm.
But that takes practice and takes really a self awareness that is you have to be cognizant of that tendency in yourself first, and then be willing to see yourself as an observer. So it's kind of like I live alone. It's just me and my dog. So a lot of this is me talking to myself or
Yeah.
talking to my dog. Really, it's not as dysfunctional as it sounds,
Oh, I
but it's
agree.
me literally saying, you don't need to do that right now.
Mhm.
And that applies to all things in my life. I can be easily distracted, and I know that. And I'll be doing the laundry, and then I'll hear the dishwasher ding. So I will go start unloading the dishwasher, and I will literally stop myself and say, finish the laundry, go back. So but that verbal
Mhm.
reinforcement, if I just think it and I don't say it out loud to myself, it's too easy just to shut it down.
Yeah.
And I've gotten better. Of course, if I had somebody here, I try not to speak to myself out loud when I'm entertaining company, or even when I have my kids here, but they've gotten used to it. But really, that ability to interrupt our thought patterns and interrupt our behavior patterns, that's exactly what we're talking about with recovery.
Yes.
So it's essential to see how the skills that we learn in one aspect of our life
Mhm.
are attributable to all other areas that we want to achieve growth and progress, and being able to catch ourselves when we're doing something right, as well as when we need to give ourselves our own redirection.
I agree. And it's how we translate. I mean, recovery isn't just about the substance, right?
Right.
It's about changing everything truly. And
Absolutely.
so that's what kind of what you're saying. And I totally agree. And I talk to myself all the time and my dogs constantly, but I am very distractible. I have definite adult attention issues. And so I will consistently be saying, just finish making the lunches.
Uh-huh.
Just finish packing the lunch.
Yep.
And I'm like constantly, because none of it's really harmful, but it is better to kind of stay on one task, and complete the task. But these tools we learn from early sobriety, just on learning how to not take a drink one day at a time, and then we just apply them to all the other areas of our lives. And I think today in our conversation, what's been so great is in a short time, and if everybody didn't notice, I'm going to give you a quick recap. We went over some real practical tools here that you can literally start to implement right now to discover your personal core values. And I do believe it is a discovery process. It's something we come to, right? It's not really something we are given or have to like or assigned or have to know. We really discover them by doing these activities. So we can do a personal core values activity similar to what you described using the cards or the lists. I think either one of us could probably help you work through that. We can do a quick inventory of your calendar. and or your finances to check in to see, and your photos to
Yeah.
check in to see what are the things that are the most important to you, because the things that are most important to us are what we spend our time and money on and what we want to take pictures of. So right away you'll be able to get a quick glimpse on like, am I really, are my values where my money is, or are my values where my pictures are? You can get a quick assessment of that. And finally, being able to interrupt your thought process, which is a huge part of my work, mindfulness and stopping those negative thinking patterns, is to be able to insert that spoke in the wheel to say, like let's stop doing that right now. We were doing this, to be able to consciously be our own best advocate in those situations, to be able to keep us on track. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, this has been a phenomenal conversation.
Yes,
Thank you
it
so much
has.
for being here with us, and I know my audience is going to get a ton out of it. So when
Right.
people want to find you, where do you like to hang out the most and have people reach out?
I am active on most social media. LinkedIn is where I spend a lot of my professional contributions around content. I can be found on Instagram, Facebook. So my website is angiechaplan.com. I am also the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called Brave Leadership. And Brave Leadership serves the leadership development needs of the workforce in health and human services. So
Mhm.
that nonprofit is really where most of my energy is allocated in building and serving really the nonprofit workforce so that they can produce better outcomes for their clients.
That's
So
awesome.
braveleadership.org, angiechaplan.com, or search either one of those on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and you'll be able to find me.
Wonderful. Well, again, I thank you so much for your time and for being here with us.
Happy to be here. I thank you so much.